pass it off to Krita. Me and Krita will be hosting. And also me, Krita, and Tassim. Y'all can clap it up, put these together. With the help of Jeff. I think that's Jeff right here with the sign. Yeah, we'll clap for Jeff and me.
All right, so I wanted to just thank Jeff and Soul Space for allowing us to host this event. I also want to introduce you to our panel. We have Quan Booth. Quan, you can just raise your hand. Quan is technology manager for Making Contact Radio. He's an independent publisher, co-founder of Oakland Local, and former editor of the Oakland Post. He'll also be hosting an event called Beast Walk tomorrow night. It's a literary bar crawl of sorts happening here in downtown Oakland. So if you guys are downtown, please check it out. We also have Raj Jayadev. Don't want to mess the name up. Co-founding editor and writer for Debug Silicon Valley. We'll get to hear more about what Debug is and how Kevin influenced and worked with Debug. We have Charles Jones, who's my husband. He's a freelance writer, journalist, local photographer, and worked with Kevin for over 13 years. He also helped introduce Charles to me. Kevin did. Tom Turpel, former founder and editor of Sprawl magazine. Also another inspiration and collaboration with Kevin Weston. And Bissette, former videographer and photographer for New American Media and former host of Yo TV. She continues to serve the community as videographer for Street Soldiers, which is streamed online weekly. We also have Iming Fiance, filmmaker and former commentary writer for New American Media and Yo. Iming actually was working with Kevin on one of his last projects. Hopefully we'll get to hear a little bit about it as she talks to us about her connections to Kevin. I also want to let you know that there is food, thanks to Fuel for the Body. If the chef looks a little familiar, it's because it's my husband's brother. So feel free to get up, get some food, get some drink, and enjoy yourself while we get started. All right, JR?
So I guess first, let's just go down the road and let's talk about how were you guys introduced to Kevin? Where did you guys meet Kevin? And how, what was your first impression of Kevin?
All right, here we go. Kevin is amazing. I walked into the Yo office at 18, and that's how I got introduced to him and to basically everybody here in the panel. He just really pushed us to be who we wanted to be and to get the stories in any way that we could. So he, to me, was the person who told me to go get the stories, and we had to film them and edit them, and he'd have to look and tell us that the audio was bad, so that next time we, kind of make sure that it's clean and we can use it and Sandy doesn't get mad. So, yeah, Kevin was a friend, inspiration. How do you say, just, really piqued our brains to go ahead and get stories that aren't being told and make sure that we do it first. And we did. It was awesome. I love it. I love him, love what he was and is.
I first met Kevin when I was 18 years old. Well, I spoke to Kevin before I met him on the phone. I was nervous and I was trying to figure out this internship I was possibly getting at Yo. And drove to the office, I met him, and kind of intimidated me a little bit because, he was a big pro back then, and I didn't really know him, so it was like trying to be this timid high school student trying to figure out my next move, and he was just so open, and once I started talking to him, he really just really wanted to know about you, who you were, and what your story was, and why you wanted to be a writer or a filmmaker or whatever your thing was. And that's my first memory of him, is that he just really wanted to know who you were. And it made me feel immediately at ease, because okay, this is just some random thing. He's real, he's legit, he wants me to be me, and that is, as someone who is trying to figure that out at 18, that was just the most amazing chance ever. So many other people who've been touched by Kevin. He really gave that as a gift to us, and I'm always going to appreciate it from him, because even though he's no longer here, I still feel that he gave me more than I could ever repay back to him.
I first met Kevin about 10 years ago, and I just moved to the Bay Area, and there was a panel at Intersection for the Arts, I believe, and it was something about arts, community, activism, and it was pretty much the typical well-meaning, kind of progressive, kind of white stuff that I was kind of used to, but there was this one cat, and I saw him the same way everyone kind of first sees him. This tall guy with an afro, and he was on the panel, kind of laid back, kind of chill, and everyone was kind of going through like with their buzzwords and their political jargon and all this, and he was just sitting there, he didn't say too much, but every time he spoke, I was, damn, who is this cat? So after like 2 hours of just hearing him obviously be one of the quietest, but also the smartest people in the room, afterwards I went and talked to him, found out that he was an editor, found out more about the publication that he was running, and how he was really doing youth community-based media in Oakland, San Francisco. And I went to school for poetry and journalism, and you can't make a living being a poet. The kind of journalism they taught me in school, I wasn't really feeling that, so it was definitely a point where I'm trying to figure out, what do I do next? And within maybe a year, I met Kevin, saw what he was doing, met Paul Cobb over at the Post, met JR, and it was the first time I started really thinking about, okay, there is a way to do media, do journalism, to tell your story that's not NBC, that's not CNN, or that's not just talking about like what's the latest rap video. So I think for me, he was the first person that really gave me the possibility and started to let me think about this as a model for like, how to do more nuanced and deeper kind of reporting. So.
Hi everybody, yeah, I'm Roger here with T-Bug, and we just want to thank the organization for putting this event on. There's people probably doing this every day in their head or at the kitchen table, hundreds of people that have been influenced by Kevin. I met Kevin probably around 14, 15 years ago, and just like a lot of other people, he helped sort of give me clarity on what my life road could be. By just having the courage to say that you can carve out your own lane. That he did it so easily and naturally, and had enough confidence that he gave you confidence to do it. So, I didn't have any media background, had no interest in media. I was an organizer, but felt there was limitations in that. And he's the one that said, well, carve out a new identity for yourself, and you could use media and storytelling as a way to do it. So one of the things I learned early from Kevin that always stuck with me, and I think it speaks to that same kind of humble spirit you're talking about, was the importance of the question, and the sincerity of the question. And he kind of, I sort of see him as like a sensei. He was a guy that has a black belt. So just sort of go to Kevin's dojo and just see how he moves and try to emulate it in different spaces. And that's basically what I've done for like 14 years is try to walk in a road that I don't think would have been possible if I hadn't met Kevin. I remember one of the first memories I had in the media context with him is a few of us, some may remember, it was the early stages of Debug, and we didn't know anything about journalism. And so we went and had a Pacific News Service editor give us a training on journalism, because we were intimidated. We didn't know how to write or why or what to do. And we're sitting there and we're learning like the upside down pyramid, and we're learning nut graphs and leads, and we're taking notes. And then Kevin walks by and he's like, "What are you guys doing?" He said, "Oh, we're learning journalism." And he's like, "Oh, you don't want to be journalists?" Like that, in that kind of provocative way. And we're like, "Yeah, I guess that's what we're supposed to do." And he's like, "I want to be a writer. I don't want to be a journalist." And just that idea of like expanding whatever the presumption was, that was sort of something that really gave us a bunch of motivation.
Hi everyone. Like what Raj said, I'm really grateful for Creative to see JR putting this on. Thank you very much for having me part of this. I met Kevin 14 years ago. I had been writing before then sporadically for Youth Outlook, and at that time it was Andrea Lewis and Teresa Moore who were running Youth Outlook. And then one summer, I come in and there's Kevin, and he's running the media thing. But you just knew right off the bat, this guy's a leader. Like, this is the leader. And I, to be quite candid, I just knew like I had to do whatever I could with his stories, with that motivation, to impress this guy. And I really tried to emulate just his passion for getting the story out. And what I really take most from Kevin is just like the subtle guidance he provided with us as like, not as writers or videographers, but as content producers. And just really looking at just trying to bring every aspect of the story together as a whole. The one thing I remember is like he never told us what to do, he just asked questions. Like you always have, so what does this mean to you? And then what does that mean? And then suddenly as you're answering these questions and talking with them, you have this story and you're like, oh man, I gotta go. I gotta get this out. And then it was always that inspiration, that subtle guidance and inspiration I always remember from Kevin and take from him. And one of my favorite phrases he always used to say is like after you're done talking with them, you just kind of have that like calm look and you just go, let's do it. And you're like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. So still got to remember that every day, get up, let's do it.
Charles Jones. I met Kevin like literally known him a little over half my life. I met him in 1994, and I came into the organization Pacific News Service at the time, New American Media now, just trying to like do something different than selling, drugs and stuff. So I didn't come in with this journalistic da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It was literally like a hustle. And I didn't see it as a possible even career until Kevin. And I mean that because coming in, I had weird feelings about Kev. Because he's this dude, he had, when I first met him, he had dreads, like these kind of mid-length short dreads. And he dressed like a backpack rapper, like basically. He was like, he constantly had a backpack on. He wore his jacket like a ninja, like up to his nose. And he would always before he made a statement, he would literally dive into the cuff of his jacket and just sit there and think for a second. And then he would look up at you and he would come up with whatever was going to come out of his mouth. And at first I really didn't jive with dude. I didn't like him. And it wasn't for any real reason other than I was from the streets, he wasn't. Here he is with this pro-black political stuff, but I find out he from Pinole. And it's I'm what you mad about? You know what I mean? Why are you upset? I'd be mighty happy if I had your life up to this point, you know what I mean? And it was a conversation I had with another friend of mine who is now deceased, where I began to take him seriously. A friend of mine, Dom, he was just like Rashad McGee, he was just like, nah, bro, Kevin, cool, you tripping, cool, you off on this, you know what I'm saying? I'm just like, bro, I don't see it. And one day, I was talking to him, and I had made all these assumptions about his education and yada yada yada. I was like, so you know, what degrees you got? And he was like, degrees? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I ain't got no degrees. And I was like, well, what? How many college years of college? He's like, I went to college. And I was like, hold on. But you run this shit. You know what I mean? Like, you're my boss. They let you run this with no degrees? And that's when I was like, okay, well, he must really be somebody. You feel what I'm saying? And because if you know anything about New American Media office space, they paperwork marks. They value people with education. You feel what I'm saying? So it was very weird and anomalous to see him have his position without the educational backing. And it was dope. You know what I'm saying? It was dope. And another thing that made me really like Kev was like, they call it, I guess, vice journalism now. You know what I'm saying? But it's really just old school guerrilla journalism, and that's what Kevin was about. Wherever the story was, whatever was going on, show up, take notes, take pictures, video, you know what I'm saying? But you don't know it's a story. They're like, you don't know what is and is not a story. You know what I'm saying? You may go into an event or a party or something and get a story out of it. You know what I'm saying? And you have to be open to it. You have to be open. You have to be looking at things from different angles. You got to be thinking critically. And I think that's what I got the most from him, is that, you know, recognizing that everybody doesn't have your experience and not everybody knows your story, and that it's valid, whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? So just tell it. So, yeah.
I met Kevin in 93, 94. I actually met him, I met him with Malcolm Marshall over there. And obviously his afro stood out the most. I paid attention to Kevin because Kevin didn't talk much. But when he did, it was always very thoughtful. And it was always very thought-provoking. Much like the other panelists, he taught me to ask questions. And one of the things that I loved most about Kevin and his style of writing and first-person journalism is that Kevin always made connections globally. He wanted you to know that whatever was happening here, it was happening other places, and that in itself was a story. That people were interconnected simply by the oppression, simply by the discrimination, simply by what was happening in our communities. We were not alone. That we, were a part of something larger, and that there was a blueprint to how to fight against it, and that writing was one of those tactics, which was how me as an organizer ended up figuring out I had a voice. Kevin was definitely a huge part of that.
How I met Kevin, I think I met Kevin, Freedom, Charles, Cash, Rashad. I met them all at the same time. It was probably about like 95 when I came to the Yo office. I remember just being tired at East Oakland and tired of Catholic school. Two different worlds, but tired of both of them. And much like Charles, I came because it was a hustle. Like Kev was somebody who would approve what I was writing. He liked what I was writing about. I didn't really have skills, but he liked what I was talking about, and he would pay me. And so I looked at it like, I want some shoes this weekend. Let me go to Youth Outlook and get some shoe money real quick. And to be very honest, it wasn't a career to me. It was a teenage hustle. And so, I look at it really like, I write essays in school for homework for nothing. Did Kevin just want me to write an essay? He got like 75 or 100 or $150 from it. And so what really sold it to me was Kevin asked me and another writer named Kai to write about what we felt about being black students in Catholic school. So I wrote it, and it wrote about racism. We both wrote about racism, but mine was a little bit harder edged on it. And I remember getting in trouble at the school, like, you know, I went to St. Joe's, which was a year after Jason Kidd left. And so they had like this real big image to protect. And I remember I said what I said, that the teacher had said some racist statement, and I put it in the newspaper. And they had this like meeting I walked into, and like all the teachers, like 3 of the teachers I respected and principals and stuff was all around me. And they basically were having a meeting before I came in and said, we need you to retract what you wrote in the examiner. And I was like, I didn't even know what retract meant. Like, you know, like, I don't know, you mean take it back? That was like, yeah, you need to, whoever allows you to write in it, you need to tell them that you lied. And so I didn't know what to do. They was like, well, we're gonna sue you. We're gonna sue your mother. And so what I did was, we had a meeting scheduled the next day. I went straight to the phone booth and called Yo and talked to Kevin and Malcolm. And I just remember, I don't remember Kevin and Malcolm ever being hyped about really anything except that. I remember Malcolm just being like, what? What? They said, what? Hold on. Let me talk to Kev. Let me hear Kev going, huh? They said, Jay, they can't do that. They're not going to be able to do that. And I'm just like, Kev, I don't know, man. I mean, I've been a journalist less than 6 months. These people trying to sue me. I don't know the law. I don't have no lawyer. I don't have no money. You know, I don't want my mom to get sued. And so I remember Malcolm was like, Kevin was like, man, just call us back in a few hours. We got this. And then I remember calling back, and then Malcolm was like, yeah, I talked to him. You know, we still working some things out, but I talked to him. The next day we had a meeting, and the teacher told me Jesus came to her in a dream. and she was just going to drop the issue. And at that point, and I used to always tell Kevin and Malcolm this, but at that point is when I realized the power of journalism. I was just like, damn, she thought Kevin and Malcolm was Jesus. I remember Malcolm was telling me how he just told me he had high-powered lawyers. I mean, isn't that what you told him, Malcolm? You told me.
He got you out of it somehow.
He's biased about it. Yeah, so that was, to be honest, that's what sold me on journalism. I was like, not so much the Jesus, that was part of the joke, but damn, my homeboys that I was with at this meeting just intimidated my school from suing me, where the school had to come up and lie and say they saw Jesus in a dream to drop the case. And then I think I went to talk to Malcolm and Kevin, and they acted just like that. It was like, it's all good, man. You know, we got you out of it. It's all good. And so, I mean, to be very honest, that's what sold me on journalism and kept me in journalism for almost 20 years.
So, I know that all of you guys touched a little bit on it, but I wanted you guys to tell us how Kevin impacted your perspective and views on journalism. Whether you are, someone that's self-taught or someone that went to school for journalism, how did Kevin kind of change your views, not only about the journalism that you participated in, but also what you read and how you perceived communication and media after working with Kevin?
Well, he made it realistic to me that I could actually participate in journalism. I never, for maybe like the first year or so I was writing, I never considered myself a writer. I never considered myself participating in journalism. I was just getting cop money. Like I was still in the streets. It was feeding my real profession at the time. And so it wasn't until like me seeing Kevin actually be successful. You know what I'm saying? With no education, no formal training, No, and like the attitude he had about it. It was like he felt as though he knew that he could provide work just as good or better consistently. That was a big thing with him, consistency. Gotta be consistent, homeboy, is what he used to tell me all the time, you know what I'm saying? And so he knew he could produce high quality work consistently. He had that self-confidence. I didn't have that self-confidence. I was just producing work, you know, at high rates because people wanted it from me. And as long as they wanted it, I was getting paid and I was gonna do it. You know what I mean? It wasn't, I didn't accept myself as a journalist, or I didn't introduce myself to anybody as a writer for a good year or 2 years. And one day Kevin was just like, he was like, you know, you never introduce yourself as a writer or an editor. And I was just like, you know, I mean, I write, but like, I'm not an editor. You know what I'm saying? I haven't been trained, I haven't gone to school. But he was like, man, what'd I tell you? You know what I'm saying? And so, it's all about what I learned from Kevin was all about straight up doing it. Just do it. Guerrilla. Go. You know what I'm saying? It's a story to be told. Tell it. And maybe this outlet won't want it. You know what I'm saying? Kevin was also big on like blogging. You know what I mean? Just to keep yourself in the practice of writing. Just to keep your voice crisp. Because everything you write is not going to always be for an audience. Everything you write is not going to always be for money. You know what I'm saying? You need to have a level of practice and a level of love and respect for it in order for you to do it properly. And I got that from him. You know, that was his big imprint on me as a journalist. That, you know, journalism was possible, doable, and could be done, you know, by him, me, and people like us at high levels on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I'd like to repeat what Charles said. You know, I think two major impacts Kevin had with me in journalism was that when grassroots was the answer, like going with the raw story is first and foremost the most important thing, but the technical details follow later. The second thing was that the real story was identity. Who you were as a person and how that aspect of life affected you. How this incident in your community or in your government or your world affected you. How is this big picture affecting you? And you know, and basically how that identifies ourselves. I think back to a couple things that Kevin got off the ground. One of them was the Global Eye Project, where a lot of writers from Youth Outlook went to like the countries that they identified with, and basically got to get back in touch with like cousins or relatives that they knew from overseas. And those stories to me I still remember those stories. I still remember Ryan Picato's story going back to the Philippines. Arlene Beatri's story from when she went to visit her cousins in Palestine. Those are like the stories that Kevin got people to write that I still resonate with. It. Like these are issues that are impacting the world, and this is how they're impacting people that I know personally. So I really still appreciate that, and you know, they still hold on to it.
Yeah, you know, I think for me, Kevin's way was bigger than journalism. The way he sort of thought and allowed other people to sort of think and thrive and take some of the steps that otherwise wouldn't. It was bigger than the craft. And I think what he did for me in terms of just looking at journalism is he made it elastic. Like he took the kind of calcified rules of what the expectations are and just demolished it and said, do what you need to do to find a story, to make a story have an impact, and use whatever device you can to communicate it. So, you know, one of the reasons that I sort of never gave journalism much credibility is because I sort of fall into that false assumption that journalists can't stand anything. you know, which is a common misconception to folks that I know that have never done it before. So Kevin was the first person to say, no, you could use this to stand for something. And then on the flip side of that, the other thing he did that was really important, not just for me, but the people I work with, is if you are doing journalism that stands for something, how do you make that not look predictable? And like, how do you actually make that interesting? And he's the one that sort of gave us a lens on how to do that, like how to actually make it something that people want to read, not just the lefties that are reading every other. Right, exactly, right, where they just want to hear what they're already thinking, right? How to make it thought-provoking. And even just in writing, like I always look for Kevin's writing. If I saw his byline on anything, I mean, he could be a sign-up sheet. I'd still read the rest of the sign-up sheet. I mean, because he did things in writing that I just never would have thought of. Like, I remember articles where the first lines would be sounds. Like he'd be writing a beat and then talk about what the impact of the beat was into some political phenomenon that was happening. I'd just never seen that before. So that was always what it was. It was just entering new spaces. It's like what Tom was saying. He sort of seemed to know the rules of his practice, like, or what Charles was saying too, like be consistent. I don't know how he knew these things, like, but he just sort of followed it because he knew the media somewhere he needed to go.
I think for me the biggest influence Kevin had was as a sounding board and just as a colleague when it came to looking at the bigger pictures with media technology and how to relate to communities. Because I think when I first met him, I had done some writing, a lot of writing before, but wasn't convinced that it could be a job, something I did for my livelihood. Met him, met JR, met Paul, like I was saying. Didn't really reconnect with Kevin until maybe 3 or 4 years later when I was in an editorial position. And I was having a lot of difficulty figuring out how to manage individuals, but more so how to manage the community responsibilities with everything from balancing a budget to dealing with freelancers to keeping the lights on in the organization. And he was one of the only young black guys that I could talk to about, yo, I have an organization, how do I run this? And it didn't come from more of like the Ivy League schools or like who had a degree in this stuff. So he's always, from the time I met him, more like somebody I can talk to about what's going on in the nuts and bolts of an organizational structure. And you know, I was familiar with his writing. I read his writing whenever I can get my hands on it. But for me, like the relationship was more intellectual and talking about the larger philosophical issues, and someone who could approach it in like a lot of different ways. He had one of the most nimble minds I've ever seen. You know, he could talk about, like people said, hip hop to politics to journalism to community activism to sports. And I think that was one of the things that made him really effective. He could look at all these different areas and kind of pick and choose what was the best and kind of funnel it through and say, this is where we need to go as media based on all these different avenues, based on what's happening in the community, based on technology, based on what needs to get done from an activism and a policy standpoint. So we spent quite a few hours on the phone just batting ideas back and forth on everything from how to fund projects to how to make projects work for longer than 6 months to a year, to how messed up the large mainstream journalism world is. And there were quite a few times I had to call him and he kind of talked me down from saying, you know, F journalism, I'm gonna go and like, you know, travel around the world or like, you know, panhandle, go to hell with it. This is like all I have to do. So he was grounded. You know, he was someone that said, you know, you can do this. This is the way to do it. These are ways that I've figured out over the, I guess by then, 5, 6, 7 years he had been working on it. But then as I got larger into like organizational models and started thinking about journalism and how do you really affect that on a national level, it was really interesting to see how a lot of the stuff that Kevin had been doing, Yo had been doing, Diva had been doing, was now kind of the hip, the hyper, the in-trending models for journalism around the country, and how this was stuff that had been happening in the Bay Area for years. You know, it can be anything from covering your community was suddenly hyper-local journalism, and there was money being funneled into it. Being a multimedia reporter was now like backpack journalism, the solopreneurs, whereas folks who are coming up from, like, they learned how to do that from the get. Talking about using the web and managing technology, he was working on that from the beginning, and now there was all this money being funneled into it. I mean, he had been doing it, Cass had been doing it for 5-10 years. So he was always there, just someone to talk about what's going next, talk about how to run this, talk about the bigger picture, but also to offer like concrete examples because he had been doing it for so long. So.
I think one of the first things I learned from Kevin is that he really wanted, he didn't want me to mirror what I was seeing in the media. He really wanted you to apply your own personal lens to things, just kind of what Yo was doing, and it really cued me into kind of, like Jay School with the nut graphs and backs and quotes and 3 quotes for like. Kevin really blew that out of the water for me, and made me realize that you don't need to fall into a specific category of journalism to be a journalist or a writer. And that was kind of like a key to breaking into a whole new world that he pretty much laid out a map. He's like, here, just go do it. You're the camera. Go shoot it. To the computer. Write it. He really gave you the tools to kind of make whatever you needed to make with what you had, and he was very helpful in that. And he's very good at pushing you without pushing you too hard. But he really taught me not only how to be a writer, but to manage a lot of things. In the beginning of working with Kevin a lot at Yo, Kevin really knew how to get under my skin. But he also really knew how to kind of give me the proper tools I needed later on to kind of like be his person to help him figure out, like, we got to get this up on the web by Monday. We need to edit it in the shot. And he really knew how to give people their skill sets for journalism in giving tools for voices that hadn't been heard.
I love that. I love what everyone's saying tonight, because I feel like that's exactly what I wrote down and what I'm thinking, and it's exactly who he is. I just love the beauty in the words. I feel like I'm going to fumble. But I guess I came into Yo in 2001, so just right out of high school, and that's where I was able to learn about Youth Outlook, learn about the youth voice, and this was just a paper magazine. And you can't help but, get excited when you see your name in this colorful, we had, colored, the print, the cover was in color, and that was a big deal. Because, it used to be a magazine, and, wow. So all of a sudden, like, as a young person, you're telling these cool stories, and you get to show it off in a nice, trendy way to get other young people excited. And I think that was the difference. The difference was that in high school, you're dealing with people who, joined ASB, the Student Body Club, and you're like, oh my God, because they're not really talking about anything. You're joining, I don't know, like the volleyball team, I was on, but they're not talking about like political things that are really affecting the community. And all of a sudden, come into the weekly meetings at Yo, and you have these different people coming in. So like Tom is this white guy who is from Livermore or something like that, and we were like, wow, you are taking far out here, and that is really far. And it was awesome. So then Tom goes and starts Sprawl, which also is like, it's just like Yo, but not. And all of a sudden, all these different things are connecting. So I remember Raj being there and starting Debug and having a voice, and you're just surrounded by all these different people. There was the whole Sway, and then the Russell, and my God, you're dealing with all these different personalities and different ways to think. You just can't help but be inspired. So with that, Kevin, I love it. Kevin gave us the camera, and that camera was bootleg, and it was somehow off the street, and whatever. At least we get to go and start shooting stories. And like the weird part about that is that this was before YouTube, and so it was just a really new concept to kind of shoot stories, and you have the freedom. You don't have to be, rich in order to do that anymore. So with that, not only are we writing these stories, and the magazine looks awesome, but now we get to go and film these stories. All of a sudden, my first story was on a tattoo artist in Richmond, and he was 18, Latin, and owned his own business. Like, wow, that is a story. Like, you're young, you're owning your business, and you're doing like a craft. But now we wanna see how his mouth moves and what his accent sounds like, and what does the shop look like. And it's way more with movement versus just pictures. And all of a sudden, so it's Min, it's Paul, it's just a bunch of different people. Whoever wants to take the camera and tell the stories, just go do it. And if you finish it, we'll get it up on the web. So we did a bunch of them. We had a lot of different stories, and because we were able to go and show these different stories, all of a sudden we make a TV show out of it, because now we have, 5 clips every week from different people, Tom included, it's just all these different people, and then we get a weekly show, and we're on like public access, and that's kind of working out. All of a sudden we're on the WB, like that was awesome, because now we're reaching the world, it seems, and people are getting hyped about telling their stories, and kind of being validated for their opinion, where I don't think that was exactly given to them. And now we're giving each other that power, just the power of honesty. And I think that's what makes us different with journalism, is because, and that's like really what Kevin was about too, is just everyone has a story and a pain and a happiness, and what's your favorite song, and now, and so with journalism school too, they teach you, you're not supposed to know the people that you interview, because you're supposed to be neutral, but that was the power of the way we got our stories, is because we know you're going to tell us the truth. And we know when you're lying, because then I know your friends who told me So I just, really still look up to him and think about him all the time, and just kind of, I guess, I'm still in awe of all the work that we've done and how we did it and where we got to put it. Like, those stories are still on the internet and still getting hits, and it's almost selfless, I guess you could say, because you're doing these stories because you're now teaching other people how to do stuff. So how do you open up a barber shop? How'd that go for you in 2006? Oh, okay, this is what it looked like. One of the last stories that we did, which was awesome too, was when it was Kevin driving, singing along with the radio, and it was that Aston Martin song, whatever, with Rick Ross, and he's singing along, driving. He didn't always drive. I think Paul was in the car, and I was in the back singing along. We go to Vallejo, Malcolm meets up, Paul meets up, and we meet up with a mother whose son had just been shot by the police in Vallejo, and all of a sudden, so you're dealing with, kind of a foreign territory, I guess, but you can't help but have empathy, like, my God, like, what are you going through? Tell me about it. And I don't think other journalists can kind of get that. I think right now, there's a lot of people who are just worried about the byline versus just, really getting the truth out. So, yeah.
I think
I said the humanity and human interest.
I think Kevin was like the father of the first person story. I think for the first like 3 or 4 years, that's all I wrote. It was just like commentaries. And I remember that, nowhere else, that would be seen as like an opinion piece, an editorial opinion piece. But Kevin would put it like right smack center. And I think it pushed me into doing more different kinds of journalism. And I think he was one of the fathers of the first person story too. I think Quan said how it, you know, he saw how Kevin and how Bailey was doing journalism. But I think that Kevin inspired Tom, inspired Ann, inspired Raj. And they went off in their directions, in their geographic areas. And then, you know, Kevin was also at the Bayview. He was a writer and an editor for the Bayview newspaper, the black newspaper. And what I remember, first off, Kevin was the first person that I ever knew that wrote in the black newspaper. But I remember he wrote poems in the newspaper. I was like, damn. You know, like, who is a poet for the newspaper? You know, but that's Kevin. Like, you know, it's like no rules to what Kevin was doing. And to be honest, like, I've been with the Bayview for like 14, 15 years, but it was Kevin that originally got me interested in even looking at the Bayview newspaper, as well as we remixed the newspaper a few years after Kevin left. When I ended up coming to the newspaper, we remixed it. But it was against everything that everybody else was doing. Like, Kevin wasn't afraid to take chances that appealed to a younger market. And I think that that's one of the things that was important about Kevin. And I know we talked a lot about his writing, but I think we got to explicitly say the way that he was an editor, the way that, you know, the firmness but gentleness, the sternness that you have to round the story out before I'm publishing a page. But also, you know, I just remember having all these different problems with journalism, like Quan, or having all these different problems with a story. And Kevin would just grab his weed from his desk, and we would go in the alley and smoke some weed, and I'd be yelling, and Kevin would just be talking me down off the ledge on, you know, this is what, come on, man, why don't you see it like this, or you don't see this, Jay, come on. And it was a trick, because I'm the one who would be real irate, and, man, what the fuck, Kevin would just be real calm, like, Jay, listen. And I just remember, like, it inspired me in dealing with younger writers and dealing with inexperienced writers and learning how to be stern but not dismissive. You know, and I think that was Kev. He was stern but not dismissive. He'd hear you out and he'd weigh your side out, but he was listening, but he would also stick to what made the most sense to him. And, you know, and I think that he wasn't nobody who was like a top-down editor. Some editors I dealt with who was just like, check it out, do it like this or we're not publishing. It wasn't like that. It was always up for negotiation. Even if the negotiation took an hour for one story that he didn't really have time to do, he would debate it or argue with you, or, you know, and I learned a lot just in terms of dealing with younger people. I think another thing is Kevin, and I think a lot of people spoke on it, he saw talent in us before we saw talent in ourselves. You know, and I hope to be able to develop that skill to the level that Kevin had it developed. I mean, look at all these journalists up here, with the exception of Quan, in some way, shape, or form was mentored or was direct colleagues of Kevin. And most people say how he influenced them to stay in. And I think that that's, you know, I think that's important. So next question. Kevin was a visionary. Y'all remember some of the last conversations, but I remember Kevin always talking about the future of journalism and the newspapers collapsing and all of this. And, you know, we're about to go from broadcasting to microcasting. I mean, stuff people don't even talk about yet. You know, like I remember when he said microcasting, I was like, what? You know, and I mean, this was 2 weeks before he passed away, he was talking about this. And he was talking about, you know, the end of broadcasting and the beginning of microcasting. And so the question is to everybody, how do you see, or do you see Kevin as a visionary? And if so, from your perspective, how, based on his work or the conversations that you have? And I also just want us to take a time count while we are reminiscing, because we got to get out of here by like 9. We have to finish this, so let's everybody take like 2 minutes.
I think Kevin was always in the media anyways. He's always playing on his phone and reading news in that kind of way. Was very just into technology itself. He played video games, and just like, you play video games? And, you know, but he also read the science fiction books and just could kind of, could kind of see just a little bit further. I think he also knew what he liked. So if he's reading news articles on his iPhone, well, we better make sure that we're going to post some news articles on the web and have them be accessible through your phone, because that's what people are doing now. And so I think it was just kind of, yeah, what does he like? What do you like? How do you access it? And let's do it. And all of a sudden, you have to create that, I guess, story in 5 different ways. Make it an audio piece, turn it into video. Don't be sure to, write it up as well. Print it out, hand out the DVDs. Like, I mean, any way you can, just get it out, because that's what people are doing. And I think he lets it up to you if you want to take advantage of it, I guess.
Kev was making us do video before us to state how to do video.
Oh my God, yes, yes.
Yes, it was very visionary that he made us do things before it was being done on an education level. So, I mean, working with Kevin like from 18 till now, like he was always on scales. He's like, are we on video? Are we on YouTube? Are we on are we on TV? Is our movie done yet? Like Kevin was always ready for the next thing to happen. And so my hope is that with everyone who's known Kevin, who's worked with Kevin, that they'll always try to aspire for that kind of mentality to always go to the next thing. I think that was one of the biggest gifts I think he gave everyone.
About 4 years ago, this cat named Jeff Jarvis, he's an NYU professor, he started using this term, committing acts of journalism. And a lot of people got excited about it. He got paid like big money to go around the country to speak about it. And the general idea is, anybody can be a journalist. You have a camera, you have an opinion, you see something happening in front of you, write it down, take a photo with the camera, record a video, and the fact that you're in the moment, like bearing witness, that means you're committing an act of journalism. And it was really interesting because, this cat who was accredited PhD NYU professor, he got all these accolades for it, but like folks on the panel are saying, like they were doing this like 14 years ago. And it was really interesting, like over the last maybe 6 or 7 years, like going around the country and talking to different people who were in media in varying capacities, and both hearing their ideas, their frustrations, what's working, what's not working, and seeing how much of that Kevin was doing 14 years ago. And it's always interesting to see, who gets credit for something versus who actually created it, or who gets credit versus who actually is doing the work. And it was always interesting to me how much there seemed to be a disconnect versus with who was talking about these issues and who was getting credit for all this community media versus the people who actually were doing it, created and came up with the ideas, but they couldn't spend time talking about it because they were too busy doing it. They were on the ground telling stories, working with community outlets, like actually doing stuff day to day. But at the same time, there was this larger media world asking, how do we save journalism? What is the future? How do we as journalists interact with community back and forth? And I'm like, well, go over to the NAM offices, like pick up, it's not that difficult. Folks have been doing it for a minute, y'all just ain't been paying attention. So going back to the question of was he a visionary? Definitely. He's been doing things for years, teaching other people how to cover news media, how to be forward thinking, how to look at the bigger picture, and how to adapt and always be moving, always thinking about how to sharpen your skill set. He was doing that for years, and whether folks on the national level were consciously influenced by him or not, the fact that he had the foresight, the prescience, the forward thinking to say this is where we need to be, and to kind of bring that home and say I'm not just going to do this for bigger newspapers, bigger media outlets. I'm going to bring this back to the community that needs it, and the fact he was doing that, like I say, years before anybody else even saw the need for it, let alone started thinking about how to solve the problems. So yeah.
Yes, he was definitely a visionary. And I think what distinguishes Kevin is that he's a visionary for a purpose. So it wasn't just to constantly prove he's the smartest guy in the room. He's always the smartest guy in the room. It was for a deeper reason, personal reason, something that's transformative. I think it was the thing outside of his journalistic talents that they were extensions of something more profound. But just to give you a real clear example, when I started coming around Pacific News Service and Yo was going through this transition under Kevin's leadership, the Yo people could correct me if I'm wrong, but back then it was a tabloid, and I remember what was so groundbreaking about it was that it was young people writing. But under Kevin's leadership and his ability to be a visionary was in the nuances, not just in the big historical shows. And so what he did was say, well, young people also need to be doing art in photo and actual design. Back then, it was being outsourced to an illustrator that was like 45 years old. And it was that was still sort of cutting edge.
We were sending the magazine out to be templated.
Exactly.
To this dude, we was paying like $3,000 a month.
Right. And so Kevin got Christine and other young designers, Sway, graffiti artists to say, now you got a new tone, you got a new canvas. But that was because like his vision, he brought integrity to being a visionary. Like there was an entire purpose of that. And I think that's what, so by the time, kind of like what was said earlier, by the time other people that thought they were luminaries caught up, he was gone. I mean, he was just on to the next thing. So by the time youth media finally caught up to his pace and said, okay, we think youth media, where youth are speaking to other youth, is valuable. He had left that like 5 years prior and said, look, actually it's more about youth communicators being communicators for the entire community. It'll be another 5 years when some college professor is going to start saying that it's really But it was visionary for a reason. I think that's what was special.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to add to that. Where a lot of people were trying to catch up with mainstream media, Kevin was looking to catch up to where they would be 5 to 10 years from now. And he really saw where things were going, especially as it becomes more of a microcosm of how journalism was. And I think one of his great strengths in that was he saw the way things were almost like diverging into like these microclusters to where you can be your own media machine. And there's some danger in that because like the mainstream media is not going to go away. The more it gets diversified, the more you have this like monolithic beast that's feeding you information. And where Kevin's strength was at was like seeing these microcosms, seeing these artists, seeing these young writers who had stories, who had something to say, and bringing them together. So, and finding like these little pieces and bringing them into one giant cluster, and bringing that forward past where mainstream media is today. And I mean, that's something that, it's hard to replicate. That's something I'm gonna miss. And it's just something that like, as we leave today, that's something we need to think about. It's like, where are we gonna be? Where do we see our craft 5 to 10 years from now? How can we get to that 6 months from now? How can we get to that next week?
Most definitely a visionary. I actually would consider him to be a step beyond that. This word I'm using, I don't think really exists. As a matter of fact, I'm positive it don't. But I think of more of like a visioneer, somebody who engineers vision, somebody who is not only like beyond the cusp of the zeitgeist, the cultural wave or whatever, but the technological advances that need to come, the advances in technique that need to come. You know what I'm saying? Like, I remember, what was this story about? I think it was about pit bulls. It was like right after a young dude that got almost mauled to death by a pit bull, and he had me and Paul walk around with cameras and interview. We was looking for people with pit bulls. You know what I'm saying? And that was the one aspect of the story. When you hear about the dog fighting story, when you hear about the pit bulls, yada yada yada, you never get the perspective of the dog owners. You never get the perspective of everybody else who catches the funny looks now that this thing has happened. You know what I'm saying? And that to me is beyond visionary, because that opened up, that opened up, and I'm not saying it's directly connected, but it's like the type of thinking that leads to things down the road. Now Animal Planet has a whole show where dude goes and deals with people's fucking vicious animals. They vicious pit bulls, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a whole media market around that. You know what I'm saying? And so, and he was on it before. He was on it before, you know, the term microcasting existed. He just had to wait for the term microcasting existed to fit into what he was thinking about. You know what I'm saying? That's how far ahead he was of everybody else. You know what I'm saying? In terms of thinking, it's amazing to think about, like just the ideas and the presentation of ideas that he had years before they was popularized or categorized or, you know, given to somebody else, you know, with a boatload of cash here. That's your idea. You know what I'm saying? So he was more than a visionary. He engineered vision. He made vision like happen. You know what I'm saying? And from him, you know, JR done moved up and moved on, and he's, you know what I'm saying, went to the next level on different things. His vision is taking, you know, Bay Area journalism, guerrilla journalism, black journalism, activist journalism to different levels in different ways. You know, like Block Report and, you know, the interviews he did with Brother Mumia. You know what I'm saying? That's beyond what people were thinking about. Nobody thought about going to death row and doing a live like radio broadcast with somebody who's not going to be here for much longer. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody thought of giving that person a voice. Nobody thought of, and it bleeds. It rolls over. You know what I'm saying? Raj, the first piece I ever read by y'all was the Blood for Machines piece, right? And it's like, that was so next level. Who thinks about what the people who put together the computer chips is going through? You know what I'm saying? Like, who thinks about that? Nobody thought about it until y'all popped up and was like, no, we here, think about it. You know what I'm saying? And its vision is carrying over. It's expanding. It's growing. You know what I'm saying? And it's gonna be somebody, you know, at this table that's gonna be on the cusp of, you know, something big journalistically coming up soon. Because that is the destiny of Kevin's legacy. You feel what I'm saying? That is the destiny of Kevin's legacy.
Well, we want to thank everyone for coming out. We thank our panelists. There is food, there is drink. Please come over, please mingle, please talk to folks. And, you know, this is only the beginning of continuous conversations about how we want to continue to honor this great man, Kevin Weston. You know, for me, a big thing that Kevin was you know, always looking to do was improve the way that youth development intertwined with community media. And I know that, you know, they are evidence that, you know, this is something we all continue to need to think about, is how do we continue to introduce young people to the stories that impact them, to journalism, to wanting to know what's going on in their own community, to wanting to know what's going on in the world. So I truly invite you to continue to check out Kevin's work. You know, we know Kevin is an editor, we know Kevin is a friend, a father. Many of us worked with Kevin in different capacities, but a lot of people, you know, forget that Kevin was a writer and had this great mind that was lucid all the way until the end. So thank you guys for coming out. Please enjoy food.